Good afternoon, everybody, once again, and thank you so much for joining this webinar. Welcome to the South African Aviation Briefing by Esri South Africa. I truly hope that you guys are going to be enjoying this session and that you guys are actually going to take quite a lot of information that you can implement back at the office. So before we actually get started with the webinar, I just want us to go through just a couple of housekeeping rules, right? So I'm just going to ask Sean to go to the next slide for me. So if you do have any questions throughout the webinar about a demo or about the presentation or some information that you'd like to know about, kindly please post your questions within the Q&A section on your Zoom application. So we will be having a Q&A session after the presentations as well as the demo when we are done. Just to sort of engage you about, the stuff that you are curious about, you'd like to find out about. This webinar will be recorded and it will be made available. So so you can have a look at if you missed something, you can have a look at it maybe when you replay it back at the office when you have a copy of the video. We also will be running some polls throughout the session. So I would just like to kindly ask you guys to just engage with us within the polls. We just want to find out just a little bit of more information about everyone on here. So now I'd just like to, again, welcome you and give you just a brief agenda of some of the things that we're actually going to be covering today, right? So this is a focused webinar that we decided to do, particularly for the aviation as well as our airports client. This is a first of our kind, Esri South Africa, and the aim behind this webinar, this session, is that we want to be able to support you guys a little bit better. So today's session is all about saying, these are the things that the Esri technology as well as the Esri, system has in store that you can already start utilizing it if you want to, or if you see something that you would like, engage with your account manager or somebody else, your product lead or industry lead, to actually start working with these solutions. So the whole idea today is definitely not to necessarily train you in terms of what GIS can do within your aviation as well as airports workflow, but it's to spark interest, right? And I truly hope that you guys are actually going to be enjoying it. It's just on a high level, we are going to be going through looking at the geospatial infrastructure for the South African nation. So how can we contribute? How can we as the aviation as well as the airports industry actually contribute towards this big geospatial infrastructure of South Africa? We're going to be looking at more modern aeronautical information management. We're going to be looking at airport safety and efficiency. And lastly, we're going to be looking at airspace operational safety. So it will be a combination of presentation as well as demos that we are going to be taking you guys through. So I'm really excited about this webinar. So I'm actually going to now just introduce a couple of my colleagues that you're going to be seeing as we go along within this webinar. So if you guys don't know me, but I know most of my aviation clients I've spoken to or I've engaged with, my name is Lebogang Mashishi, and I am the product lead at Esri South Africa, and I'm also the account manager for the aviation industry. I am joined today by Jonathan Weaver, who is the Global Aviation Business Development, who works within Global Aviation Business Development at Esri Inc. So Jonathan, I don't know if you want to just say hi so people can just see you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Lebo. Yeah, I guess just by way of introduction, further introduction, yes, I do support our global aviation business development. I've been with Esri probably now for about 17 years, kind of across different roles within Esri, from product development, product management for the aviation solutions, to project implementation and project management, to now my current role, which is business development, kind of hitting across all spectrums of the aviation community. So really, in my current role, I look at it as I'm here to support our local offices, such as Esri South Africa, looking for ways to implement GIS for aviation organizations to really improve their business outcomes and efficiencies. So with that, I think I'll pass it over to David.
100%.
Hey, good morning, everybody. David James, calling in from Florida today. Pleasure to meet you all. I lead Esri's Airports GIS activities. So real pleasure to meet you all and looking forward to showing some of the tools we have for our airport customers.
And then we've got Michael.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mike Beavers. I'm a solution engineer. I work with airports around the world and with Jonathan and David, and I'm excited to help today in presenting some of the tools that I'm sure you'll be able to take advantage of.
Thank you. Yeah, so Michael and David are actually joining us all the way from the US. So it's actually morning on their side. But yeah, so thank you so much. I'm actually just going to hand it over to Jonathan, who's going to be taking us through the first section. Once again, colleagues, I'm just going to encourage you guys to just engage with us within the Q&A section. If you guys have any questions, or anything that you would need clarity on, we'll be here to help. So I really hope that you enjoy the session. Jonathan, over to you.
Great, thank you, Lebo. I guess just to kind of enhance what you had mentioned in terms of the agenda, we're going to be covering a lot of material over the course of the next 90 minutes. This isn't necessary, as Lebo mentioned, this isn't about training. It is to provide kind of an overview of solutions, how they're actually being used across the aviation industry. I could certainly see this just being the initial start point, and there could be further deep dives within your individual organizations. But I think ultimately what we're trying to do is provide really a contextual look of GIS. How can it really improve some of the business outcomes across the aviation community? So I think you did a really good job of kind of setting the stage with that level, and I think we'll just kind of continue on with that. All right, so I should be sharing my screen now. Let's see if I can actually advance the slides as well. I think one of the things that we actually see across the civil aviation community, airport authorities, is this realignment or reorientation, I would say, in the way that they provision a lot of their aeronautical data and aeronautical information. In many ways, this really began with initiatives like the transition from AIS to AIM. There's the electronic terrain and obstacle data. There's other initiatives as well that has helped these organizations kind of reorient themselves. They need to be relevant and effective in contributing to their national objectives and really having a seat at the table. They need to be engaging with the community, even with citizens, to respond to the ever-changing landscape of aviation. And I think this was probably really highlighted with the current pandemic that we're still actually in the midst of. So being able to really collaborate across agencies, across organizations, and provisioning some of that information. And with respect to that information, it needs to be authoritative. How can you deliver that timely and trusted information to your stakeholders, to your community as well? And then finally, it's about efficiency and aligning staff to technology, to processes, again, to really impact and improve some of those business outcomes. Now, depending on the different organizations that we have within this particular workshop, they're going to reorient still around these four pillars, but maybe in different ways. So if you look at airports, for example, there's a layer that's focused on customer service satisfaction, financial performance as well. You look at the defense and the military side, it's about protecting and providing defense for a nation as well. But all of these still have relevance across these different pillars that we see here. And then that kind of takes us into that geospatial infrastructure. So this is really a new pattern that's kind of emerged around the web GIS pattern. It's an interesting and compelling pattern, really, because it's really opening access to GIS capabilities across the organization. So to individuals, to teams, to departments, really across the organization, or even to other organizations or national government agencies. And then to the communities, those are the citizens, the stakeholders. You each have different communities of practice, if you will, within your own organizations, and how do you actually reach those communities with authoritative geospatial information? So we're seeing these national government agencies contributing to their nation's geospatial infrastructure, so providing foundational content from statistical information or statistical data to topographic, maritime, aviation, of course, even weather and so forth. They provide the foundational content as data and services. So other national government agencies and users can actually tap into that and add their own operational layer on top of it. And that could be across health and human services, emergency management, transportation services, and so forth. And as a result, we're seeing a collective value that this pattern of WebGIS brings to a nation, brings to economies, to society as a whole as well. This is what we call GIS at scale, or maybe more appropriately, collaboration at scale. And then we can look at really the geospatial infrastructure for South Africa. Again, we see already across the planet, airports and aviation authorities that are contributing to their nation's geospatial infrastructure. But what does that look like for South Africa? You've got organizations like the National Institute of Communicable Diseases. They've played a very prominent role in terms of informing communities around the current pandemic with dashboards, with provisioning of geospatial data. There's agencies like the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. So they're aimed at improving cooperative governance across 3 different spheres of government. That's local, provincial, and national. So all of those government or municipalities within South Africa report to COGTA. And they're doing so using ArcGIS that provides that spatial awareness across the different stakeholders. And then you've got others such as the Africa Geoportal, or even supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. And so these are all interconnected, and they're all contributing in some way to the nation's geospatial infrastructure. And so we want to kind of have you as the audience and stakeholders within this kind of think about how you can contribute in terms of aviation data. So from the Civil Aviation Authority perspective, ATNS, even the airport community, how do they provide data to the national government agencies and even the South African Air Force? So how are we all contributing to this concept of a geospatial infrastructure for South Africa? So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on this particular slide. This is really some examples of how our users across aviation are using ArcGIS. Now we'll see some of this throughout the presentation and demonstration. So I want you to kind of focus on a couple of these. The first is in the center, top center, which is the noise mapping. So we have a partner in Europe that has really made it their mission to make noise visible. So being able to take GIS and visualize what that raw signature or noise signature for a departing aircraft looks like, for example. How does terrain impact that? And then you can start to add layers on top of that to understand, okay, well, here's a raw noise signature, but what are the actual communities that are impacted by these flights coming in and out of an airport? The other one I want to draw your attention to is in the lower left-hand corner, wildlife mitigation at Schiphol Airport. They actually have a radar system that's installed at the airport that's tracking birds and wildlife at the airport. It's a huge safety hazard, and they look for ways to mitigate that safety hazard. And so they do this, so they're able to track that in real time, providing this information to staff that are actually out in the field so they can disperse that wildlife. The ultimate goal, of course, is just to prevent the interaction between aircraft and wildlife. We've seen the consequences with the U.S. Airways flight, many years ago. Thankfully, that had a positive outcome, but they were forced to land in the Hudson River. So it is about kind of improving safety across the airport as well. And they're all doing this with what we call a complete geospatial system, which is ArcGIS. And there's different areas of ArcGIS, kind of beginning with Arcgis Pro. This is our desktop application. It gives users a very robust set of capabilities for analysis, for advanced mapping and visualization, and really publishing content to the web. So you can do that through what we call ArcGIS Online, which is a software as a service, or you could do it to ArcGIS Enterprise. So that's more of an on-premise solution to to create this sense of a web GIS. So they actually operate very similar. Most of what we're going to be showing today is going to be around ArcGIS Pro, the desktop side, as well as ArcGIS Online, which is our SaaS offering for GIS. And then, of course, there's also a complete developer experience as well. So some of the organizations that we work with, they have large development teams, so they like to make sure that some of the applications that are being deployed are very custom focused. But I would say a vast majority of our users really like to adopt more of a configure first approach. So what can they do with the tools out of the box? Just configuring the tools to meet specific needs for their organization. Now, with ArcGIS, we support 3 unique systems, what we call systems. You might hear us refer to this even throughout today's presentation and demonstrations. One is what we call a system of record. This is the transactional data management. This is your database of aeronautical information, airport information. This is really what kind of drives a lot of the business for the most part. And then you have what we call a system of insight. Think of the system of insight as the analytics. I often think of it as how do we make sense or how do we understand all of the information that we're collecting? How do we start to synthesize it in a way that we can reveal some of the patterns from that data and create the understanding that we need? And then the final one is a system of engagement. And we're probably going to spend a lot of time here in the system of engagement. So these are the apps and maps that really connect our users or our community to the information, to the data, to the understanding of that information as well in very compelling ways. And one of the ways that we do that is through ArcGIS Hub. So this is a system for collaboration and engagement. You can think of ArcGIS Hub as an extension to ArcGIS Online. It really empowers stakeholders and citizens with some GIS capabilities. It's not just the ability to organize the communities around certain what we call initiatives, but it is putting powerful GIS capabilities into the hands of those citizens or stakeholders as well. During the pandemic, ArcGIS Hub was one of the more popular pieces of our system that was deployed to support different community engagement patterns. So being able to get information into policy, into those that are making policy, for example, those in the public as well. So this is something, and we're now starting to see aviation communities start to really leverage ArcGIS Hub because of the way it actually organizes a lot of the content. And we'll have a demonstration on this specifically here shortly. So we'll transition a little bit into what we would call a modern aeronautical information management system. So being able to leverage location to really kind of open up new business opportunities. We see this happening more and more across different civil aviation authorities, air navigation service providers, airports, really across the planet here. A lot of this was driven from the transition from AIS to AIM. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But it's about how we can start to reimagine some of these workflows so we can create new products and services. And we begin with a vision for aviation and airports, and that vision really begins with the collection and integration of data. So this can be structured and unstructured data. Think about AIXM for the kind of air navigation data, or you could think about field data collection, so for airfield inspections. Real-time observations, as you saw with the example at Schiphol Airport, pulling in locations of birds in real time. So starting to integrate different formats of information, real-time observations all together, so we can start to really analyze that information in very unique ways. So it might be the analysis of the obstacle surfaces and making sure that the airspace is free and clear of any obstacles. It might be in terms of understanding weather patterns. Coming up with new ways to visualize that as well. This was the animation you see was actually a part of a study in Europe in terms of how to decrease the cognitive load for airports by visualizing this from taking I guess, the traditional 2D maps and then turning that into a 3D environment. And it did, in fact, reduce the cognitive load for pilots. And then once you have that understanding, or once you create that understanding and analysis, it's, what are the different information products that you can create? So it could be the traditional aeronautical charts, for example. More and more, we're seeing this move towards web services and web applications, deploying dashboards in a variety of sectors within aviation as well. And then what that does is it brings kind of the entire community within aviation together. And that might be for an organization, it might be for internal and external stakeholders, from planning to air navigation services to environment, command centers, even weather, and so forth. So it really provides kind of a comprehensive vision for how GIS can really impact these different areas, from data collection, integration, to analysis, producing, and then how do we manage that and share that information across. Because again, at the end of the day, what we're looking to do is increase that collaboration, not only within the individual organizations, but across organizations, because that's where we start to achieve that collaboration at scale, and where we start to get more into a more connected and interconnected environment with the system of systems. Now, looking at modernizing information management, I often think of, one is the transition from AIS to AIM. But when I think about that transition from AIS to AIM, I'm actually thinking about data-driven services and products. The ability to consume different sources of information, different formats of information. Again, we talked about AIXM, real-time observations. Once we pull all these different sources of information together, you can start to create coherent picture for different operational uses and start to target those products and services. So again, you might create the traditional charts. You might get into more kind of web mapping and web applications, helping to support things like Nodems even. So again, when I see transition from AIS to AIM, it really is about having a fully data-driven system that complies with all of the standards and recommendations from ICAO, but it's really guided by a larger global air navigation plan, one that's really harmonized globally and it's integrated very much the way that the air traffic network is integrated, from the airport system to the aircrafts that are in the sky, through all of the regulatory components that really drive how all of these stakeholders are actually communicating with one another. We see this as emerging in the US, in Europe, with efforts like CSER, FAA's next generation, or next gen rather. So all of these really kind of contribute to that modernization of the information management system. We even have a couple of products that support this effort. These are all built as part of ArcGIS Pro as well. So ArcGIS Aviation Charting, which is kind of in the top here. As the name implies, it focuses on the chart production capability, bringing kind of high volume chart production to users, leveraging kind of standardized data models. So that is your AIXM, being able to take that data model and optimize it really for cartography. And I will say that aviation charting, aeronautical charts are probably some of the most complex charts, just the nuances to the charts, but also the data model that is leveraged across aviation. It makes charting very complex, very hard, but we've looked at ways to really streamline that production process. And then you've got obstacle management as well. And you'll notice that there are some shared components between aviation charting and then ArcGIS Aviation Airports. So on the airport side, again, on the data management, when we look at that, we're looking at airport operations, for example. So again, leveraging kind of international standards, airport mapping database, for example, to help support those airport operations. Again, shared components with obstacles, but even getting into a rich set of editing capabilities, both in 2D and 3D for signage and marking plans that are then ultimately submitted to the authority. So we really look at the ArcGIS Aviation Airports as kind of a foundational component for airports to leverage the information model, but then starts to provide access to information and really building out a variety of information products that are centered around the airport operations. So one of the more valuable things about ArcGIS is, you've heard me say it before, it's an interconnected system like the air traffic network. It's not a single solution or a point solution. As a complete GIS, it can integrate with existing aeronautical information management systems. So if there's already an AIM system in place, it doesn't necessarily have to replace that, it can augment that. So by adding ArcGIS to it, you start to open up a lot of new business opportunities, you start to open up new ways of visualizing information. Examples include volcanic mapping. So think about in Europe when they had the Icelandic volcano erupt, I think that was back in 2010. It shut down European air traffic. So what they want to be able to do, and this is an example from ANER, the Spanish authority, is have a better understanding of how the ash cloud will actually impact certain airspace at certain levels. So they can basically load files from the different volcanic centers around the world and see what that ash cloud model is going to do and what airspace specifically is going to be impacted. But beyond volcanic mapping, I mean, there's weather mapping, there's noise mapping, and even Nodems, and we'll do a brief demonstration around Nodems as well. And then finally, kind of around the real time, being able not only to visualize it, but to actually start to analyze some of the traffic patterns as well in real time. So just a few words on the aeronautical charting side of things. I mean, we could actually spend an entire webinar just on aeronautical charting, actually a series of webinars on charting. Again, as part of an AIM system, we look at charting as a base requirement. It needs to be data driven in the sense that if there's an update to a navigation component or a nav aid, let's say a frequency, we don't need a charting analyst to go through every single chart and update that frequency. We want the system to make that change for the analyst itself. So they can actually go through and just verify those changes as opposed to actually keying in, which can be error prone. So how do we create a fully data-driven system that supports a variety of different chart types, that supports ICAO compliance, that supports really fast and efficient production? And this is just really a high-level overview of what that workflow looks like from data updates, say, for example, AIXM, but also how do we detect what is changing within the database? How do we present that to the user so they can see from a charting perspective if there's a change in data that drives some of the text, or if there's change in data that drives some of the geometry, they can quickly and easily visualize that and accept those changes and move on to the next. This is all built on what we call a geoprocessing framework, which at the end of the day provides us the ability to automate more and more of that production process. And kind of really the final piece to that is it's all configurable. We've built out a set of business rules that users can leverage right out of the box. But chances are, at least let me say it this way, every organization that we worked with they have some changes that they would like to make, because no two en route charts are the same. You know, looking from country to country, there may be some specific in-country requirements that they need to adhere to and that their users expect. So the system needs to be adaptable for that as well. And so we provide that to our users. Now, at the bottom here, I am including a link to a webinar series that we're doing that's kind of built around the charting system. What I can do is when we get to kind of the next section, I will take that link and drop it into the chat window so you can actually have access to that and register for any of the upcoming webinars. Because like I said, charting alone, we could spend several hours talking and discussing how our tools are able to support some of the charting initiatives around the world. So quickly going back, it is about a configure first approach for our users. I mean, yes, there are, some of our users do have teams of developers, but a vast majority of the civil aviation authorities, the airports that we work with, they don't have those large development teams. They may not even have a dedicated GIS team. So we need apps that are easily configured, that can be easily deployed and get into the hands of the users. Because ultimately, once we get those tools into the hands of the users, that's where the impact is made. That's where the value, that's where they see the value is once they're able to use it. I think it's called the network effect, where it essentially describes that the more users that you have a part of the system, the more value it brings. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to do is bring value to the users in a very relatively short time frame. So kind of condensing it from traditional projects that may be months or even years to deploy down to weeks. And then refining some of these apps based on some of the user feedback. And that can be from field applications, so using things what we would call Survey 123, for example, to deploying different dashboards. Again, just configuring, and when we say configure, we're talking about no code for some of these types of applications. And then just really quickly, in terms of the experiences that we have for deploying these different types of applications, we have Web App Builder, Experience Builder. Again, these are the no code or low code. And then you can get to more of a development experience with App Studio. So these are designed for cross-platform native applications. All three of these have different roles within organizations and can be used and leveraged in different ways, but oftentimes we see users wanting to just quickly get some capabilities out into to their stakeholders, and doing that through something like Web App Builder or Experience Builder is traditionally the way to do that. Okay, so I think with that, we're coming across our first poll, and then we'll jump into the first set of demonstrations. So I'll turn it over to Lebo for conducting the poll.
100%. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that section. Yeah, so the first question that we have in the poll, it says, are you or your organization currently using any mapping software for aviation or your airports management workflows? So I just, like I said, kindly just asking you to engage with us. So the different options there for the answers is either yes, no, or maybe. So are you guys currently utilizing any form of mapping software to sort of assist you with that? So you'll notice on your screen, there'll be like a little poll that actually pops up, and you can choose your question. As soon as the questions are actually, as soon as we start seeing some of the answers, Sean is going to be assisting us with actually visualizing some of the answers, and then he'll end the poll. Okay, so yeah, so ooh, that's quite a lot, like 70% of people are actually saying they are, and I'm so glad to actually see that number. And I can see that you know, about 30% are saying no, and that's also okay. I mean, this is like a great place to actually be, to start seeing how you can incorporate maps within your workflows. So I'm going to hand it back to Jonathan to actually show us in detail, you know, everything that he's been speaking about in terms of a demo. So over to you again, Jonathan.
Yep. Yeah. So I've got basically kind of three distinct parts of this demonstration. I'm going to move fairly quickly through each of these. But again, if you have questions, as Lebo explained, please utilize the chat window, and we will get to the questions at the end, or get through as many questions at the end. And I think the plan is, if we're not able to get through all of the questions, we'll still answer the questions and then send them out to the group. Is that right, Lebo?
100%, yeah. So
okay.
if you're not able to answer any questions, we'll send you a pack once the webinar is done.
Okay, so in terms of the demonstration, we're going to take a look at ArcGIS Hub. We're going to look at some Nodem applications and dashboards, and then look at more of kind of the desktop side, Arcgis Pro, and kind of centered around aeronautical charting. So with that, I'm going to jump over to a web browser, because I'm going to use ArcGIS Hub to really drive a lot of the different demonstrations that we have today. So when we look at ArcGIS Hub, or when we think about ArcGIS Hub, like I said, this is our community engagement or stakeholder engagement platform. Again, it's an extension to ArcGIS Online. It's our SaaS model to deliver all of the GIS capabilities. And it's really a great way to organize a lot of the different geospatial assets, like maps, applications, even to a certain extent, data as well. We see organizations like the FAA in the United States, they have a complete open data platform. So they provide their aeronautical information through open data initiatives using ArcGIS. So this is just one example of how it can be used. We've got maps that are embedded within within our hub site here, along with all of these different application cards. So once I click on one of these cards, for example, let's go with the Nodems here, this Nodem Dashboard. In fact, I'll go ahead and launch this one as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say, while Jonathan is opening that, just on hubs, something to note is that this is a no-code experience type development. So that entire hub that he created, you don't need to be a developer. It's something that you can get access to within ArcGIS Online. It's very rigid based. So it's quite easy to actually configure it yourself within the organization. You don't really need to hire, web developers to create this nice application for you guys. You can literally get started in a bit. So yeah, like as it's showing, it's quite very easy to actually configure and to actually create. So it's available within ArcGIS Online, and you have access to this on ArcGIS Enterprise as well if you guys are on it. So it's one of my favorite applications, actually. I like it.
Yep, exactly. I mean, so we've tried to kind of create an experience around South Africa Aviation, for example, calling it the South Africa Aviation Geospatial Hub. And as Lebo mentioned, I mean, it is a configurable experience. So I can come in and create map content, for example, or author map content in something like ArcGIS Pro, and then simply drag and drop, and then point to my map in which I want to display that content here. Now, I'm just choosing some random maps. I don't know what's going to pop up here, but it's that easy in terms of that point and click experience that Lebo was mentioning. This is that no code experience for getting content into the hands of the users. So I'm going to switch back over to my published draft. Oh, I did that wrong. I wanted to view the published, not publish this as a draft. Well, this now becomes a part of my published hub. So what I wanted to do is take you through kind of a couple of different applications or dashboards around Notice to Airmen or Nodems. One of the things that I kind of realized in one of a presentation I delivered, I think at the Global AIM in Tunisia a couple years ago, there was a pilot for, I think it was Pakistan Airlines, that was just talking about Nodems and the difficulty for pilots to actually read Nodems, especially before flight. So they may end up with pages and pages of Nodems that look something like this. This is text-based. There is a structure to it, but oftentimes there is no locational information, or at least apparent locational information. So, for example, it may say, taxiway Bravo is closed between taxiway Alpha and taxiway Charlie. Okay, well, how do we take some of this unstructured information and create geography from it so we can actually point out where these closures are or where these Nodems are specifically? We may have Nodems for a specific runway or runway direction. It may be for both runway directions. It might be around aprons or even airspace as well. So what we're able to do is take that unstructured data and then create geography from it using something that we call LocateXT. And then by doing that, we can start to publish this information out. Now, this is one way of doing it, which is really kind of taking the downstream data. But another way to look at it is, well, how do we impact kind of the upstream content for creating Nodems? This is an example that actually we've assembled, but it was inspired by a European user. Again, this is, low code, no code, actually, I believe for this. So in this particular application, what we're looking at is we see different airspace. And what our European user said is, look, for a lot of the airspace, it's going to be uncontrolled airspace. There's a couple of different areas that, they're going to have tower service 24/7, but we want to be able to show what airspace is active versus not active versus will be active in the next 30 minutes. So we've got, now I've just selected the airspace over here in Durban. What yellow means is it's going to be active in the next 30 minutes. So if I actually just select this Nodem here, we get information about the airspace. We can see Nodems current as well as previous Nodems or even future Nodems as well. And we can set up some filters around that. So I have this that's going to be opening up actually in the next 9 minutes. So, maybe by the end of the demonstration, we can come back and see that it's turned green. Anything that is in green means it is active right now. And then once once I guess once it is closed, it goes back to the kind of this neutral state, which means the airspace is closed. But what we're doing is we're giving controllers the ability to go through and actually select an airspace. Let's say we select this airspace. We can pull the ID of the airspace in by selecting it. It's already got my credentials. So, you know, let's say I'm the controller. I want to make this airspace active from a certain time. We'll say in the next 30 minutes. And perhaps we want this to be active for maybe a couple of hours. I can provide a note here. We'll just say scheduled air traffic and go ahead and submit that. And so what will happen is we now have another NODEM for the system here. Whoops, zoom back in. And once it reaches a certain state, we'll be able to see that it's yellow or green based on the different time controls that we have set up for it. So again, if it's going to be active in the next 30 minutes, we'll want to be able to see that as yellow. And if it's already active, we want to see that as green. And then, of course, as you select the airspace, it'll filter out all of the NODEM activity for that particular airspace. Okay, so moving on from NODEMs, let's dive into our ArcGIS Pro here. So this is the desktop application side. ArcGIS Pro, I mean, we still say it's new. I mean, I don't, maybe a good poll would have been to have how many people are using Arcmap versus ArcGIS Pro for those Esri users. ArcGIS Pro, it's our 64-bit application, multi-threaded. At the end of the day, what does that mean? It means that it's going to be more performant. We're going to have more performant displaying and scrolling through particular pieces of information. We've got aeronautical information that is set up here for South Africa. We can start to symbolize it and provide kind of that aeronautical symbology. And I'll come back to that when we get to the aeronautical charting part. But what we can also do is take the same information, and this is where we get into that kind of data-driven component and aspect, and start to visualize that in 3D. So taking the same airspace information, for example, we can now see this in the 3D. We can take those airways and create corridors or tunnels in the sky as well. And based on the upper and lower limits, based on lateral limits as well, we can start to really create that 3D representation of the data and information. Now we can also take some of that same information and apply a set of business rules so we can actually create more of the aeronautical cartography that ANSPs, CAAs are used to, I guess, seeing in terms of what goes into their AIP system. Again, I mentioned aeronautical charts are some of the more complex charts I've seen, and part of that is because you've got label boxes that look like this. Now, this seems like a relatively easy label box, but creating splits on the side and at the top, well, that takes some work to do. And because we don't want it to be individual components, we need this to be a single label or annotation that moves collectively as a group. Moreover, when the annotation is created, we want all of the components to be created together. And so I'm not having to interrogate the airspace. Okay, I see this is a Class C airspace. I can now drop it onto that label. Let the business rules handle that. It will handle all of that. You can even see some of the Morse code over here. So that's being embedded. Again, something that's very subtle, but something that can be very challenging is we've got vertically stacked Morse code when our text is actually being read horizontally. And again, we've got the splits here. And of course, we've got all of the aviation symbology. So just a quick note on the symbology. Let's go to my catalog here, get our styles. We've got what ships with aviation charting is this style set. So if I just open it up, we can see all of the different styles or symbols that are associated with this particular style. So that all of the different nav aids, the airport symbols, all of the line and even airspace symbols are embedded within this particular style. So it is a very robust set of styles that are automatically included with the charting extension. Okay, and so maybe the final piece to kind of share is, even though that we're creating a lot of the content or maybe connecting to that content, applying some symbology to it. One of the nice things that we can do is actually share this content out, which means that we can publish this as web services. We might publish it as a map service or even feature services. So think of a map service as kind of an image that's being delivered to the end user, whereas feature services, they can actually start to interact with the data. They can query the data. They can identify different data sets and look at the attributes with it. And it's pretty easy to do that as you just fill out some of the information, analyze it, and then publish that as a service. And then once you publish that, you can start connecting that to different web applications. And we see users doing this within our community. Let's go back to our hub site. So for example, LVNL has done this with their VFR chart viewer. So I'll go ahead and agree to the conditions. They have their style. This is for their VFR chart, the way that they're publishing content over the web using a simple web application like this. Again, I can go in and actually identify some of the airspace. I can add my own content to it. I can change the base map. I can even export some of the data as well. If I select some data, I think I can find something I've selected. Oops, let me actually select something. Here we go. So we've got runway, we've got aerodromes. I can actually even export this out to a CSV file, to a JSON, different ways that I can actually leverage this data outside of this web application here. And I can tell you that for LVNL, the Dutch authority, there was no code involved. Again, it was configuring and deploying this. So they published these services and then brought this into Web App Builder to deploy this very simple but very effective way of working with their stakeholders in their community. And this is a trend that we're seeing more and more across civil aviation. The Spanish authority, for example, they no longer include VFR charts in their AIP. They include a link to a very similar application like this and say, this is where you can find the information. And then they give instructions on how to use that application. Okay, so I think.
And the next thing I just wanted to say as you were doing this, these are actually live, Jonathan, right? So if anybody wants to maybe like have a look at it, as well as you spoke about the Spanish authority as well, and I've seen it as something that you can go explore. It's open to the public, so if you want to have a look at it and it sparks your interest, then you may definitely do so.
Yeah, what I will do is I will go ahead and drop links into the chat window for this particular application, as well as the Spanish authority. They actually cover quite a bit within the Spanish application, and then as well as the link to the webinar. Okay.
Great stuff.
I think that is it on my side, at least for the time being. We'll come back to me, but I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, David James, who's going to pick it up and talk about Smart Airports GIS. Are you there, David?
Yes, I'm here, Jonathan. Just getting ready to share my screen.
Sure.
Are you seeing my screen?
Yep, we can see it now.
Okay, and you can hear me, obviously. Okay, well, hi everybody again. David James. Switching gears a little bit, I want to focus in on smart airports and the use of GIS at airports. Going to be working with my colleague Mike Beavers, going to show you a whole series of demos. Pretty fast-paced, but what I want to explain is we've created a very large portfolio of smart airport GIS solutions that leverage Esri's powerful ArcGIS platform that Jonathan has described to you. Our solutions are designed to address critical, high-priority airport business needs. And these needs really focus around 5 things: safety, security, and health, customer service satisfaction, operational efficiency, environmental management, and financial performance. And our proven solutions deliver high value with low implementation effort. And what we're seeing is many of our airports customers are using these solutions to fuel their recovery from the ongoing COVID crisis. We're going to provide you with an introduction to some of our solutions, and we hope to have an opportunity to explore them with you in more detail at some point in the near future. So some of the things that we have, these are just some samples, and I know we're going to share the slides with you. As Jonathan mentioned, we have a core product, ArcGIS Aviation for airports. We regard that as the foundation for Smart Airports GIS. And this is an example of an infrastructure viewer that consumes that data and makes it available to users through a web interface. So, you know, in this case, we're showing airfield lighting with some breakdown of information on the side, and then some charts below to show the number of lights and the types of lights that can be displayed all over the web, a secure web environment, very easy to use tool. Next, we're going to demonstrate this, probably one of our most popular tools, very easy to implement. Actually, we've just completed the implementation of this with one of our large US airports. We did it from start to finish in less than 5 weeks. And it's a tool that supports airfield inspections and wildlife observations. It can actually be adapted to any number of airfield operations that require an inspection component. It consists of a very friendly, easy to use mobile app and management dashboard. And as I say, we're going to show you that in the demo. We're using currently, you know, one of the sort of interesting advancements in GIS at airports recently is the use of drones to capture very high definition imagery, and then using our artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities to automatically detect runway and taxiway pavement condition. And again, this is a dashboard that shows the results of that analysis. It's very easy to view and understand, and you're able to calculate approximate areas on the fly, all through a web interface. We work with many airports that, even through COVID, are almost like construction sites. And this is an example of a very simple, easy to use tool that helps airport operations staff just keep track of all the projects that are ongoing across the airfield. Very easy to use. Again, it consists of a mobile component that allows you to capture information about the projects, and then a very easy to use web dashboard map interface that allows anyone that has interest in these projects to explore where they are and what's involved. Jonathan mentioned we have lots of analytical tools. So many of our airports take advantage of these noise analytics around airports. You know, we're seeing lots of airports with urban development that encroaches on the areas near to the airport, and both the communities and the airport want to monitor the impact of noise from aircraft and understand how they can mitigate that, and our tools help them do that. I'm sure you know, your airports, you're receiving BIM models from your architects and contractors that are involved in new construction. We're able to very easily integrate BIM data into ArcGIS and create scenes like this and make them available across your airport organizations through a web browser. So you don't need to have a PhD in using Autodesk tools now to view BIM data. You can do it relatively easily over the web using Esri technology. Mike's going to show you some examples of where we've used that. We've also, you know, we're not all about just maps outdoors. We now have products that allow us to map the interior of airports. You know, these are vast facilities. They're also one of your main, you know, lines of revenue, non-aeronautical revenue, where you have all of your concessions and restaurants. And our tools from ArcGIS Indoors are used extensively by many of our customers to map those real estate properties, understand the revenue that's being generated, and publish that information internally through dashboards so that executives can understand how the airport's finances are performing, almost real time. We're also able within ArcGIS Indoors to track the movement of travelers by detecting the movement of their mobile devices, and then perform analytics, combining that data with point of sale data from the retail operations. So, you know, if you have a huge crowd of people waiting to be served at a fast food outlet, and you know from the point of sale data, you've only sold a fraction of the meals that you thought you would, those analytics will provide you insights about perhaps some different staffing plans to maximize the sales opportunities. We extend those sort of ideas to properties around the airfield that get rented out to different businesses, whether it's a hangar, storage facilities. So we have a wide range of real estate management tools. More importantly, I guess, you know, we're seeing our technology used quite extensively in airport operations centers, command centers, and we have products that can be used to track real-time activities, track the movement of staff that are involved in responding to an incident. Some really fantastic tools that we can apply to the sort of operations and incident management world. Guess we're going to move to a poll now before we get into some demos. So, Lebo.
100%. Thank you so much, David. Okay, so this poll is just sort of taking, picking up from the last one. It says, if you answered yes to the previous question where we asked you, are you using any mapping software for your workflows? Which mapping platform are you currently utilizing? So are you an Esri user? Currently, are you using some open source software to assist you, or are you currently utilizing another form of mapping system to actually assist you with that? So the poll is going to just pop up on your screens. So just choose your answer from the options that are below. And yeah, then we'll just have a look at some of the answers as we go along. So let's have a look at some of the answers. So I can see a very big bulk of you guys are saying that you are using the Esri software, and I can see that there's also a portion of you guys that are actually utilizing that. So actually, just gonna once again picking up on Jonathan's presentation where he was speaking about the different Arcgis Pro versus Arcmap. So I just want to find out from you guys, if you are using Esri software, which one of the applications are you currently utilizing within your workflows? Are you still a user of Arcmap? Are you using Arcgis Pro, which Jonathan actually showed us? Are you utilizing ArcGIS Online? Are you using other Esri applications that may not be stated above, or are you just totally not using Esri at all? Which is also perfectly fine. You're in the right space, and hopefully after this, you actually start utilizing some of Esri's applications. So once you've made your mark, we can see those answers, quite a varied number of replies over there. And I'm just going to thank you for answering our polls. And I'm going to hand over back to, I think it's Michael, who's going to be taking us through the demos, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. So Mike, if you'd like to share your screen.
100%. Thank you.
Right, Mike, and as you get set up, just a quick comment on that last poll. That's very interesting, just to kind of see the responses. There was a question that was posted into the questions as well in terms of where Arcmap and ArcGIS Pro sit with respect to equivalency. Once we get to kind of the question and answer stage, I'll address that, and I might need Mike to help provide some amplifying information as well, but we'll kind of cover that together.
Can you see my screen?
We can.
Yeah, we got you, Mike.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate the introduction, and I'll review some of the tools that Jonathan and David have mentioned. And I'd always like to start out by encouraging you to think about making your GIS available to your users, or if you are those users, then you want to consume and contribute to your GIS using apps. And everyone's now real accustomed to using mobile devices in their everyday life. And GIS is no different. the intention behind the app is this: to give the user quick access to the information they're looking for in a real focused, easy to use mobile device. And that's where a tool like your own hub site, your own website, is helpful, because it's a container. It's a place for the apps to be located so that others could get quick access to them. And that's what you're looking at here, is a website that I have, that I've skinned to look and feel like the rest of my organization. And it's easy to configure, and it's of course web-based, so there's really no special software necessary. And as you can see, I'm signed into the web page here. This is my username. And when I sign in, then I can scroll down, and then I can see that I have access to these applications, some of which David and Jonathan have already mentioned. And when I want to view them, I see information about it. For example, I'm going to do some airfield inspections in a minute. How I'd get to that app would be simply click on it. And that's the idea. And then another important component of the hub, the website, is you can embed a variety of information into it, including videos like this that come from YouTube, other story maps, and a variety of different types of applications. So the key takeaway for you is share your information with your users through the web and make it intuitive and easy to get to through a web page like this. All right, I'm going to transition over, and I'm going to start talking about conducting inspections across the airport using a series of tools that we created that are all based in ArcGIS. And there's some workflow that most of your airports probably go through, and I'll take you through that at a high level, then we'll talk about them in detail. The application's intended to be used by a few different business units at the airport. The first is the operations manager, or any stakeholder who wants to see the status of the airport in real time. And they'd use a dashboard, a web-based dashboard, in order to see that information anywhere securely. The next part of that workflow is, excuse me, as an inspector, I'm going to be going out on the airfield and doing my daily inspections and logging any issues that I've discovered and submitting those things in real time so that they're fed back into this dashboard, and there's notifications that are automatically set up through the application to notify maintenance if there's issues that they need to work on and resolve. And then finally, once those issues are resolved, then there's a workflow in an app to allow someone to go out and re-inspect to verify that any of those issues were resolved. So the airport can be returned to normal service, and then that information's, of course, automatically pushed back into this dashboard. All right, so I'm going to play a few roles. The first will be that of the maintenance manager, or the airfield operations manager at this airport. And I've logged into a website, whether I've got that on my mobile device or on my desktop computer. So it's secure, and this is a dashboard that shows me the status and the location of any of the inspections and issues that have been reported throughout time. And it's map centric. So in the center of the map, you'll see we've got a base map and then the location of these issues. I'll show you what you're looking at here. So these are any issues that have either yet to be resolved with a no, or they already have been resolved and fixed. And then the status of any assignments that have been already assigned by the maintenance manager. It's easy to go in and then identify if there's any issues that have been resolved or not resolved today. It looks like there is one. There was a nav aid that was reported earlier today. And if I select that issue, then I can see details about it, including a photograph. And that information becomes available because the inspector submitted it through another app, which we'll cover in a minute. Maybe I want to just see those issues that are yet to be resolved. And then of course we got the filtered list. And just like before, I could select it. Likewise, based on priority, it looks like there's 3 urgent issues that have been reported, one that's high and one that's routine. So let's take a look at what else is included in the actual map. I already showed you there's inspections, but as we zoom in, you'll notice an airfield diagram will render, and then likewise, a high resolution aerial image that's part of your subscription. So this is the airfield diagram that shows the location, like Jonathan mentioned earlier, of taxiways and runways and other facilities that may not be apparent or obvious. And then as I zoom in, you'll notice there's imagery, high resolution imagery that comes with the Living Atlas, which is part of a subscription that you take advantage of when you have ArcGIS online. And the dashboard can also include a list of whatever other assets are on the airfield, including things like airfield lighting, which you can see that airfield light has an ID and then what type of light it is and its status. So the dashboard really is intended to give decision makers a really quick, comprehensive view of the issues that have been reported, and then be able to report that information back to them as things are being collected in real time. All right, I'm going to transition into another role now. I'm going to be playing the part of the inspector who's out on the airfield, and I'm going to do a daily airfield inspection. So I'm in my truck. So a lot of the inspectors, if you haven't seen them do that before, it's a very rapid pace environment. So they're sitting in this truck and they're driving across the airfield and trying to collect information quickly and accurately so that, of course, the airfield is safe. And historically, inspectors were doing that using paper or maybe some third-party application that didn't connect to the rest of their enterprise. And that was very inefficient. And there were some other difficulties involved in that, including not being able to understand where other existing issues were, or having a very detailed understanding of geographically, if issues are clustered together, there may be reasons for that. With this app, which again, I have an iPad or an Android or a Windows tablet, then I can log into this application through the web, and it's able to be used whether you're online or in an offline environment. And much like the dashboard, it contains a map. And inside the map, you'll notice the same information that the dashboard included. Now, why we have a map with these existing issues is inspectors that we spoke to before were actually re-reporting problems that had already been logged into the system because they weren't aware of where they were. So in this case, now I'm not going to go, even though maybe there's still an issue over here, I won't report that because I can see that it's already been logged. Okay, let's focus our attention now on the left side of the screen. And I'm going to tilt my tablet and then expand this so this part of the form becomes the focus. And the form was built using tools that allow me to quickly configure this tool to look and feel very much like a paper form that the inspectors might have been using before. And there's no coding involved. It just, with this form, I was able to configure it quickly. And using drop downs and pick list, I can collect that information in my vehicle much, much faster. So there's the date and time, and that comes right from my tablet. It's a daily inspection, and with drop downs, then I can simply select the shift. Now, if I don't see any issues while I'm inspecting during my duty, I simply go in and select that I've inspected these areas and that they're satisfactory. And then I submit that issue report. But if I actually do see problems, then I can log them here. And I'm not so lucky today, there was a problem or two that I'm gonna notice. The first was if there's any objects that are on the airport and I see them, I could quickly pick that up and take a picture of it and log it. Now, if I do notice any issues, you'll see it in the drop down there here. And I've noticed a crack today, and it's in the runway. And when I select runway, then the list of the runways at the airport automatically is here, and all I have to do is tap it. I'm standing near that area where there's a crack on the runway, and I could take a picture of it and use a markup like I've done here. And I can take as many photographs as I like. Now, this is an urgent issue, so when I select urgent, then there's a few things that happen behind the scenes. The first is, number one, the issue's logged as urgent, and it's located on the dashboard as an urgent issue. And the second thing is, a notification is sent to the airfield operations manager and the maintenance manager that an urgent issue has just been recorded. And they'll get an email, and in that email, they'll get a link to the dashboard, and it'll take them directly to that issue that I just logged. And the last thing is, if you've got a work order management system, then we have the ability to link this record, this observation, to your work order management system, so it could automatically create a work order for you. And the information captured in here could be stored in the work order. And Jonathan mentioned it earlier, the Nodem component is managed here. So if I were to be able to log in to and then connect to a Nodem manager, I could click this link and then create the Nodem automatically. Of course, with the date and time, Nodem is a smart number. I can't resolve this issue, so it does require a service request. And when I select yes on service request, it'll push that information into your work order management system. If you don't have a work order management system, we have a lightweight version of one that allows you to track your work orders and dispatch your workers as well. Now, I can't resolve the issue, so I have to say no. Of course, there's always a map involved. So in here, I could either select my GPS if I'm actually parked on the runway, or in this case, there's an aircraft that's on the runway. So I'll just tap the area in the map where that crack occurs. And then it logs the latitude and longitude. In order to keep my hands free, we've got the ability to dictate my comments here. Major cracks on runway 28. Runway needs to be closed. Repairs need to be made. And if I noticed any more issues than just this crack in the runway, I'd click that plus sign. And when I did that, then I could get an iteration of the same form, so I could record as many issues as I wanted during my airfield inspection. And you'll notice, because there's a crack in the runway, this automatically selected that runway as unsatisfactory. And remember, all this is being logged in a database for auditing purposes and for recording. Now, if I have to finish my inspection later, I can delay that, or in this case, I don't. It'll log the date and time, and it'll be submitted. And then when that record shows up in the database, of course, I can do another survey. But most importantly, you'll notice that the issue becomes logged here in the map. And as I zoom in, I could see it by tapping on it, see the details, and also the photograph with the crack. But that's not all. Remember, we've got a push notification that's just been sent to my maintenance manager. And inside the dashboard, they could navigate directly to that issue that was recorded, select it here, and then see details about it. Or again, filter and say which of those two issues have been logged today only. And we can see that in addition to that one issue that was logged earlier, now this issue shows up. All right, so what I won't show you now is the work order management side, because some airports have different work order management systems, but to guarantee you, we do have a component that gives you the ability then to automatically link to your work order management system. So let's skip that part and we'll go now to the reinspection. So after the work has been done and the issue's been resolved, before that airport returns that runway to service, we need to send an inspector out to verify that the issue's actually been resolved and that the cracks are repaired and the runway's ready to be reactivated. And this is that issue. So I'm an inspector going out onto that runway now, and I verify that those repairs have been done and the cracks are repaired. So I simply go in with my tablet, select that crack issue, and notice it populates that with the issue number. Or if it's an asset like a runway light, then it would populate that information with the asset tag. The date and time when it was originally logged, what was wrong, and that now I do believe the issue's been resolved, and I submit it. So now that's been logged for auditing purposes, and we can then go into and create a report of all the issues that we've observed through time. And for auditing purposes, you can submit that to your auditing agency. You can export that information into a variety of formats or create a typical report from it. So you'll see these issues recorded here. And I want to say, send those to someone in an Excel file. Okay. That's the airfield inspection side. And I'll take a short break, and we're going to transition over to a couple of more tools that airports are really finding value in managing the facilities, not just where the aircraft are operating, but where people move. And I want to talk to you about ArcGIS Indoors.
Yeah. So Mike, if you could just take a few minutes to do this, because we're getting near the end of the meeting. We need to transition back to Jonathan shortly.
Yep. All right, so ArcGIS Indoors gives you the ability to map all your facilities in interior space, like you see at this airport here. And that information makes its way from AutoCAD into a map. So I can see details about any of these terminals here, including information about all the spaces and who leases them. And that's true in 2 and in 3D. So I can transition to a 3D viewer quite easily and navigate through the desktop, and it's floor aware. Of course, the same information is available here as is in a mobile app. So now I'm going to use the tools on my mobile device and navigate to this fire extinguisher that requires some maintenance. I'm a maintenance director, and I need to go from where I'm located now using these tools directly to that fire extinguisher, and it gives you turn-by-turn instructions. You can see those routes. So with interior space mapped, not only are we able to do navigation and asset management and inspections, we can do other things as well. Very relevant for safety and security. So using Indoors, I could then map the location of all my security personnel because they carry the mobile app with them, like you saw a minute ago, and log inspections or any of these issues that have been reported. In this case, there might have been some issue that happened over in this parking lot. I can see the view shed of the CCTV cameras and also embed live video from those cameras into a dashboard like this. I could identify the security officers who might be in the current map extents and then communicate with them and tell them to go to that location and investigate. Lease management too. So airports that have lease space on the airfield can see the information about that lease of those areas with this type of a dashboard. And most importantly is to try not to identify vacant space so that you could generate revenue from that and return that back to maximum capacity. Inside the airport, likewise, you can manage your leases of all the vendor spaces. And with Indoors, we've got a detailed interior map. And including in that would be who's leasing what space, what businesses lease what space. And using this web app, I could easily go in and identify a specific vendor and see details about it, including its unit who's overseeing it and manages it, a picture of that lease space, a lease agreement, and even a floor plan so I could map for social distancing. How am I doing on time? I don't want to chew into your other time, but I've got just a couple of things I could show, or we could transition that back to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think we've got about 10 minutes left in the webinar. I think like with everything that we've shown, particularly on the airport side, you can take any one of these solution areas and create an individual webinar out of it. And so the idea that we're trying to provide here is to really whet the appetite in terms of, hey, here are a lot of different capabilities and solutions that we can show and provide. And I think what this would do is just kind of lend into other meetings, more focused meetings, let's say for the airport community or for civil aviation community or even for the Air Force. So if you don't have anything else pressing, Mike, I think what we can do is maybe transition. Go ahead.
No, that's a good stopping point. Yeah, go ahead and take over the screen share and we'll go from there.
Okay. So how about we do this? Let's go ahead and jump right to the next poll question as I start to take control of the screen share.
100%. Okay, thank you so much, David, as well as Michael, for that airports session. So I'm also going to make it quick. Just the last question that we'd just like to find out from you guys is, which of these components appeal more to the work you do? So are you more interested in charting and cartography? Are you interested in data management, obstacle management, asset or infrastructure management, airport inspections, or other? So this is an multiple choice question, not multiple choice. You can choose multiple answers. So, if you are doing charting and cartography, but you also do manage some of the data, then you can select both of them. So yeah, we don't have a lot of time, Sean. I'm just going to ask you to just end the poll and we can see some of the answers there. So we do have a bulk of people that are actually interested in obstacles, and I think that's something Jonathan is going to be covering today. So yeah, interesting. So great stuff. Jonathan, over to you.
Okay, great. And I'm going to keep this brief, again, high level, but I think we're going to cover enough. Really, I'll try to cover it off in the next 5 minutes. Like I said, we've done, webinars around obstacles, that take an hour long. But really, when we look at obstacle evaluation and management, similar to what we saw previously in terms of our vision for aviation, we're taking that same vision and distilling it down to a single workflow around obstacles. So collecting information, it could be from an obstacle file, it can be from a survey point, it can be from other services, web services that we pull information from, but we want to be able to take that and then analyze that against the safeguarding surfaces, the Annex 14 surfaces, for example, produce the obstacle charts or various reports that are necessary, and then really kind of share that and manage that across the life cycle of the obstacle. When I got a pull of the data for South African obstacles, it really kind of fit into this flow very nicely. And what I'm going to do is just kind of transition into a quick demonstration around that. So let me just move some of the windows out of the way. And we're going to start here first. So this type of application, again, it's a web application. It's using some of the obstacle limitation surfaces that have already been published, and I'll come back to some of the tools to create that. This tool can be used in a couple of different ways. This can be an internal tool or application within a civil aviation authority, for example, or it can be an external facing tool to conduct a self-evaluation, like for land developers that might want to put up a tower somewhere. They know their coordinate information, the height of the tower. They can do that, come into a particular location, for example. We'll go ahead and launch our obstacle evaluator. And let's say I want to just kind of drop a new building over here. Maybe I want to change the height of my building and say, let's say it's going to be 65 meters. Submit that. I get some real-time information. Well, based on my height, based on these coordinates, I've got a penetration of 7 meters for this. The elevation of the OIS is at 57.87 meters. I can actually zoom in and kind of tilt this a little bit, and you can actually visualize and see that, yes, it does penetrate, and it's penetrating by, what was it, 7 just over 7 meters. So it's one way a developer can actually come in and perform a self-evaluation. So based on these coordinates, if this looks like it is something that would meet the needs for the developer and it doesn't penetrate, let's say they actually end up lowering it to 45, go ahead and submit that. Hope that's still over. Forgot what it was. I might be in the transition area. Let's come over here. There we go. So this might be the area that I want to ultimately build. What I can actually do is connect this to an obstacle submission form. So in fact, this is that obstacle submission form. I can come in, enter my name. Trying to get the caps lock right. My email address, the type of building or structure. It might be, let's say it's going to be a building. Ground elevation, if we know the ground elevation and the height of it, we'll just say 76. Will it be lit? And then I can drop a point or actually enter my coordinates and altitude of that. So what I'll actually do is I'm just going to drag, let's jump out all the way over to South Africa here, and we'll just drop a point maybe on the West Coast here, and then I'll go ahead and submit that. And so, great, this has been submitted. Now it can actually launch an entire workflow within the Civil Aviation Authority, for example. So I could come in using a dashboard like this, and if I start to zoom out, we now see that I've already included or dropped or submitted some surveys for those for the obstacles. And if I just do a quick identify, I'll get that basic information. It's a building, ground elevation, height, all of that. What's interesting, it is red. That's an indication to me that we've got all of our obstacles that have been submitted by developers, land developers, that need to go through an evaluation process. So if I jump back over to San Diego, I can quickly filter those out and say, okay, these are the obstacles that still need to go through a submission process. I can also look at those obstacles that have been constructed, that have been verified, have visual confirmation, survey confirmation as well. We also get some metrics around here. So how long is it taking us to do an obstacle evaluation? So maybe we have a target that we need to be doing these under 30 days. We've got SLAs that say we'll be able to perform these within 30 days. Anything beyond that, we want to be able to monitor and watch that closely. So again, a quick way to just look at a gauge and say, yep, we're on track for all of the obstacle surveys that we're processing, or if there are specific constructed obstacles that actually need some kind of field verification, we can deploy our field team to go actually verify, survey and verify those obstacles. So kind of how that happens, switching back to ArcGIS Pro, here, if we zoom out a little bit, we've been able to pull in all of the obstacles for South Africa. Actually, I'm going to use a bookmark that'll make it easier. Go to the airport around Johannesburg. We've got a number of obstacles. So this includes anything that's been approved, conditionally approved, constructed. This is based on your information as an example. And then we can easily filter that out. Whoops, it is context appropriate. So we'll now go to those that are in progress, and we can start to get a better picture of, for your obstacles, these are the obstacles that actually need to go through that evaluation process. We do that using tools like within ArcGIS Aviation. So we'll jump over to the toolbox. I talked earlier about having a number of analytical tools available for users. We've got an Aviation Toolbox for airports, where we can actually construct our different surfaces against the different criteria, Annex 14, 15, Annex 4 even. We can even support some of the building height restriction surface areas for navigation equipment, PAPI surfaces, light signal clearance, and so forth. Once you create the surface, which I've done here, we would then go through an analysis step. So just analyzing those runway obstacles here. And what would happen is it would report back all of those penetrating obstacles. It's a really quick tool to see, okay, well, what is penetrating, what is not. I can identify on this, and very similar to the web application, quickly see how much is it penetrating by. So This is the height of the structure. This is the delta Z, which is the amount of penetration. Anything that is a positive number means it's penetrating that surface. Anything that's negative means it's underneath. And then it also gives us information about, okay, well, what is the height of the OIS at that particular location? And so this has become a very effective tool, not only on the desktop side, but also on the web side. And I'm going to kind of close with this example in Panama. So what they've done, and this is a real world example, is in Panama, they wanted to build another vehicle bridge across the Panama Canal. Hugely, hugely important piece of infrastructure for Panama. However, the local designers, city local planners, they came back with the design and passed it to the Civil Aviation Authority, and they ran through the tools, ArcGIS Aviation tools, and identified that all of these structural points of the bridge are actually penetrating some of the critical surfaces. So as a result, they're actually going back and redesigning elements of the bridge to make sure that it doesn't actually penetrate these surfaces. So again, this becomes a very effective way to communicate and collaborate between agencies to make sure that both the airspace is protected, as well as being able to install some very important infrastructure for the country. And this is an ongoing process for Panama. Even today, they're still going through this process. So with that, I'm going to jump back over to the slides here. I'm going to skip a couple of these slides. You'll have access to these, and then really just get down to the last bit here. And that is about the implementation approach for pretty much a lot of what you've seen today. And there's different paths. And how we see some of our most successful customers, they take two approaches. One is a near term, but in parallel, taking a mid to long term approach as well. That near term approach really is focused on a couple of business areas and focus solutions around those business areas. While they go through the system installation and configuration, they do the training and knowledge transfer. They're able to quickly get an application deployed and into the user's hands so they can start to take benefit from that. And as you heard David talk earlier, they were able to do the inspections app within 5 weeks. That's incredible. We've seen these types of projects take years before. So being able to consolidate that or condense that down into weeks is exactly what we're after, and that's what's going to bring value to organizations. But in parallel, you can take a mid to long-term approach as well, which is really establishing what your geospatial strategy is. What are all the different business areas that could benefit from having GIS tools and applications to support their workflows? And then you go through the data management and the system architecture. What are those, defining and outlining what those solutions are, and how do you integrate that with other existing components? And then the last one is change management, because I think oftentimes this gets overlooked. But anytime you go through this digital transformation, you need to have a change management component. And that change management component really needs to be led by someone within the organization. It needs to be staffed and resourced. And so I think with that, I know we're just a couple of minutes over. I think what we can do is maybe I'll turn it back over to Lebo, and then we can go through the Q&A section.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, gentlemen. Yeah, so I think we are a little bit over time. So Jonathan, I don't know if you want to maybe handle questions. I see we just have 2 questions.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you just maybe, hop on.
Yep. I'll go through some of these questions quickly, and I did answer some of them in the chat already. So one was in reference to AIS and AIM. This is AIS is Aeronautical Information Services. It's kind of the traditional way to provide services and products for civil aviation authorities, and really over the last 10 years, there's been this transition to move more into information management, and that's where you have kind of consolidation of aeronautical content. And that way you can actually that's where you get into data-driven products and services. It's not just about charting, but it's about information management. And then from that information, you can create multiple products from that. The second question that was loosely answered was around ArcGIS Pro and Arcmap. So I think the question was, well, what about, is there equivalence between ArcGIS Pro and Arcmap? The short answer is yes. Anything that you could do in Arcmap, you can now do in Pro. It may be a little bit different workflow, but those capabilities are there. Over the last, I don't know, 3-4 years though, there hasn't been any new development that has gone into Arcmap. All the innovation and evolution has gone into ArcGIS Pro. So ArcGIS Pro is, while they've been continuing to do that and also trying to capture all of the capabilities of Arcmap, it is much further ahead than Arcmap at this point. And yes, I mean, Arcmap will be phased out. I want to, maybe not phased out is probably not the best term, but there is kind of this mature support that it will move into, and then it'll no longer be supported. While users that have perpetual licenses can still use it, you will not receive maintenance on it, for example. And that I think is out to 2025 at this point. So you can expect to have support with Arcmap, but there's not, I wouldn't anticipate any kind of corrections happening with Arcmap. It'll be really just kind of the most urgent bug corrections that are happening. All of the new development is going into ArcGIS Pro. And that's why it was interesting to see kind of that question, the poll question in terms of who's using Arcmap and who's using Pro, because I think at this point, we really are encouraging our users to take advantage of everything that Pro has to offer, because there's a lot. It is tightly integrated with the rest of the ArcGIS system. So the ability to publish services and start to connect to other live stream data is easier. You're not going to be able to do that within Arcmap, and that's why we really want to encourage our users to move into the Pro environment now at this point.
Just a quick one, Jonathan, on ArcGIS Pro as well. ArcGIS Pro completely, but does that also mean that the airports as well as the aviation extensions have also 100%, looking
Yes.
like what they used to look like in Arcmap? Okay, that's
Yep.
that's great.
So on the airport side, we've had equivalence for I think a couple of years now. On the charting side, we've only reached that kind of equivalence. Maybe we don't have full equivalence. You can still produce all of the charts. It's just the level of automation that we're striving to achieve in terms of what we've had in the past. At this point, though, en route charts, VFR charts, all of that is fully supported within ArcGIS Pro charting. When you get to standard instrument departures and arrivals and instrument approach charts, while you can do that in Pro, we're looking to automate more and more of that production process. So I would expect in the next 1 to 2 releases, we'll have everything.
Yeah, 100%. And I know that the release cycle for ArcGIS Pro is quite fast. So
yes,
I'm happy with
that is something that is something to be aware of. Yeah. A couple of the other questions coming through. Annex 14, 3D evaluation demonstration, what platform was it? I think in terms of the platform, you're probably asking more about the extension. So it was, there's 2 sides of it. There's ArcGIS Pro that we didn't really go through the full evaluation process, but the tools are there in ArcGIS Pro within the Airports extension. On the web application side, that's a little bit different. I think we want to explore that further with you in terms of, okay, is it something you envision for external stakeholders, or is it something for internal stakeholders? Because there's different ways of actually deploying that. But that was using a JavaScript API, really using some of the code samples and then orienting that to what you saw in that 3D, I guess 3D web application for evaluation.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And then the last question I see, what are you currently doing using these tools for airports in South Africa? I'm not sure that I can answer that. That might be a question for Lebo, because I think the question is, are airports currently using any of the Esri tools, and which is more popular?
Okay, so we currently do have our colleagues at Airports EXA that are actually utilizing our technology more on the asset management or infrastructure management. So for us on our side, it's definitely the airports that's a little bit more popular, but we are trying to obviously, make more awareness again, because I think that's maybe been one of the biggest things, is awareness in terms of, the charting solutions and so on. And we are basically utilizing that one. So yeah. Okay.
Right. I do recognize that this was a lot of content and information that we tried to cram into a 90-minute.
Certainly.
Went a little bit longer than 90 minutes. I apologize for that, but I think David, Mike, they did a fantastic job explaining the solutions around airports. They'd be happy to further explain and go into detail, as myself would be happy to go into detail across pretty much everything else that you saw in today's session.
Yeah, 100%. If you guys saw something that sparked your interest, you'd like to chat about a little bit more, whether it was presented by Michael or David or Jonathan, I've just attached my email address on the screen. So if you guys want to have access to any of the stuff, I know Jonathan has put in some links on the chat section. I've also put in the link for the aviation webinar series for 2021. The next webinar is happening on the 31st of August. And on our time, it's going to be 4 p.m. and it's going to be focused on aeronautical charting. So I'd just encourage you guys to maybe have a look at that. The other last thing, just before I close up, is that if you were interested in some of the obstacle stuff, there's a really nice lesson on learn.arcgis.com. So if you do have access to some of Esri technology, it's a really nice lesson to sort of go through and play around, so you can familiarize yourselves with that. And with that said, I'd just like to thank you all, firstly, for just attending, giving us some of your time. I really hope that this session was, quite informative and helpful for you. It's definitely not the last time you guys hear from me. And if you guys do want to, engage a little bit further, you're more than welcome to contact me. I can put you guys in touch with Jonathan, with Michael and David. Like I said, we all just basically one team here to help you and support you within your aviation as well as your aviation workflows. I'd also just like to say thank you to David and Michael, who woke up very early for this. So thank you so much for just taking the time. I know Jonathan is also on holiday. Fortunately, it's 4 p.m. or so on his time as well. But thank you guys so much for just presenting all those wonderful and great demos. I really appreciate it. So so we are going to be staying on the line just a little bit more, but we are going to end this webinar. So if you guys still do have some questions, we're just going to be staying on the line for like 5 minutes. So if you guys have some questions to ask, then you can definitely do that. But yeah, from my side, I would just like to say thank you, everybody, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon.